that feel since we pulled out farthest from the wall? Kind of thing? Yeah, that's pretty. My old roommate was telling me a story his grandmother tells him about how electricity came to Portland, Oregon. There was one day that the electricity was supposed to come on, and they all waited around the house a long time. And then suddenly all the light bulbs lit up, and everyone was excited and they cheered. And then they had a little celebration. The world had been changed forever. In the clinical literature, you can read about a man who was born with very intense pain at the tips of his fingers. It was a chronic problem and there was no cure for it, and science barely understood it. He functioned reasonably well in society. He had a wife and children, and he could support them reasonably well despite the constant pain. He held a job as a truck driver and by some accounts was a bit of a bastard, but he did okay. One day they found a cure for his disease. It was a relatively simple process. I don't know the details, but the intense pain that had been with him all his life went away. Shortly after, he fell apart completely, lost his job, lost control, lost his mind, had to be hospitalized. When I was 13 or 14 years old, my family took a trip across the United States in our station wagon. On the way, we took a special detour through Los Alamos, New Mexico. We drove along dirt roads to a place with many rundown industrial buildings, and we passed some signs that said, "Go back," and "Do not enter." I remember a dusty feeling of neglected asphalt. We drove up to a building which looked like a gray grain silo, very tall. It might have been made of wood. My father didn't stop driving, but pointed up to it, saying, "I helped design that building. That's where they built the bomb." And you could see he was proud of the fact, and so was my mother sitting next to him in the front seat. She said we'd have to get out of there fast because something bad would happen if they caught us there. I don't know if you know it, but sometimes when a person has epilepsy, they'll cut that person's brain in half. Epilepsy occurs when a strong pattern starts in one part of the brain and that pattern spreads to the whole brain, and the brain freezes up and has convulsion. They cut the brain in half so that the pattern can't ever spread to the whole brain, and hopefully it'll stop the seizures. The people who have this operation are helped by the fact that they don't have seizures anymore, but they start acting weird because half of the brain doesn't know what the other half is doing. The communication between the two has been cut off. And sometimes they'll find themselves buttoning their shirt up with one hand while they're unbuttoning it with the other hand and not know why. There's been a lot of literature written on split brain patients, but the fact is that there are only 7 of them in the United States, and they all know each other. The reason that they know each other is that they can't function very well in the world, so they make their living as a band of traveling experimental subjects. All the scientists know LP and SM, and they're in all their journals. They'll grow old together. A friend of mine used to always cut the ham in half before boiling it, and I asked her why she did this, and she said she didn't know why she cut it in half. She'd always done it that way, and she'd learned to cook from her mother. And then she went and asked her mother why she always cut the ham in half before boiling it. And her mother said she didn't know. She had learned to do that from her mother, my friend's grandmother. And so finally they went and they asked the grandmother, why did she always cut the ham in half? Why cut the ham in half before boiling it? And my friend's grandmother said, "You mean you still do it that way? I only cut the ham in half because we couldn't afford a pot big enough to hold a whole one."